So much for that reading. Friends, it is so good to be here with you. The season of renewal is upon us. As noted earlier, it's the beginning, it is the spring equinox. And so it is that every spring the mother gives birth again. She pours out her gracious gifts of bird, bee, and bud, along with the water and warmth to nurture these into abundant life. What a profound gift to each of us. As I sat yesterday writing this sermon on my back porch, I was delighted by the new green leaves of the maple tree, the first blooming azalea, the chatter of more than a dozen birds in the trees swaying around me. It is so easy to accept and celebrate these gifts that come through no effort of my own. But what if these gifts are more dependent upon me than I realize? What if the renewal of the earth depends upon my participation in the process? In the last several decades, the life ways and wisdom of Indigenous people has become more well known and understood. At the center of their many cultures is a fundamental respect for and engagement with the natural world that is captured in the word reciprocity. Reciprocity, the practice of exchanging things with others for mutual benefit. Perhaps there is more I could be doing than simply receiving nature's bounty. Perhaps there is something I must do to protect and promote these gifts. Blessed are we when our daily actions and interactions align with dreams for collective flourishing. In Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, she shares the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving prayer that was taught in Indigenous schools and is used as a way to bring the community together at big gatherings. It is a rather long recitation, thanking the animals and plants, elemental and celestial beings for their unique contributions. Saying thanks is a way to give back. Saying thanks as a community is a way to create understanding and unity about what our collective role and responsibility is for the well-being of all. Indigenous people have given back to the earth and her many life forms in other ways beyond saying thank you. For centuries, they observed and cared for the earth and noticed things they do to help her thrive, like controlled forest burns, moving crops, and even whole communities around so that the earth could take a rest, making sure not to deplete animal or plant populations, and growing different crops together because diversity creates strength rather than monocultures, which breed weakness. Blessed are we when we treasure the wisdom of the earth. Before the coming of Western culture, they took only what was considered necessary and threw away very little. How very different this is from how most of us live today. We are in a system that is failing us. While some of us may remember an ethic of frugality impressed upon us from our grandparents' generation during the Great Depression, it is important to recognize that this frugality was due, at least in part, to an environmental catastrophe created by terrible Western farming practices and a religious teaching known as manifest destiny that was quite opposite of the idea of reciprocity. Indigenous cultural practices speak to a much greater sense of responsibility and partnership with Earth's creative processes. We have lost touch with this kind of wisdom and our relationship to the earth. And so repentance and reparation is sorely needed. Woe to us when we cross the boundaries of the earth, when we continue to push, extract, and consume in willful refusal of glaring devastation and the need for rest. Now, I don't think I need to enumerate the problems we face. Aware of the urgency of this moment, though, the organization I work for, GreenFaith, offers us the opportunity to directly address the heart of the problem, the injustice and disparity that exists among our communities and between countries, and the interlocking systems of extraction and oppression that sacrifice the earth and people for the benefit of a few. One step in responding to this challenge is to follow and honor the collective wisdom of Indigenous and people of color, as well as frontline communities, those who are most affected by the extractive and accumulative lifestyles that have brought about the climate crisis that we face. This means listening to what people in these communities are saying and bringing our resources and our power to the problems and the solutions that they define. Another step is to examine our own scriptures for the teachings that will bring us closer to each other and the spirit of life and love. We know that every tradition teaches in some way that the earth is sacred and that humans have not only a responsibility to care for the earth, but the moral duty to make amends for harm done. The creation story in its original form ends each day with the words, "And God saw that it was good." But in the retelling of the story this morning, we are reminded that creation is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of which we are an integral part. And so yet another step is to embrace the prophetic voice of our collective faiths, to name the source of our suffering and speak truth to power. For GreenFaith here in the United States, this means getting clear about the suffering caused by our great dependence on fossil fuel and telling our financial, business, and government leaders that they must own their responsibility to move us as rapidly as possible to renewable energy sources and to do so in a way that is equitable and just. We know this work is impossible to do alone, and so we remember that at the heart of every great social movement, there has been the catalyzing influence of faith. We need to name that faith and that moral responsibility that we have that in a way that will engage us and unite us. Holy, holy confrontation with corporations that harm is the faithful labor of love. So this year, between the middle of March and the beginning of May, every major religious tradition is celebrating an important holiday or holy day. Since approximately 80% of the world's human population identify as people of faith and spirit, that means that potentially millions, if not billions of people will be gathering to celebrate Holy, Passover, Easter, Ramadan, and the birth of the Buddha. Because of this convergence, we are reaching out to people of faith everywhere we can to invite them into what we are calling the sacred season for climate justice. Imagine what it could look like to have millions of people in congregations and sanghas and temples around the globe stepping forward on this issue. It is our hope that across various spiritual traditions, we will dig into our teachings and see how these holidays and holidays might be reframed in a way that centers our relationship with the earth and what actions we could take to protect her and the most vulnerable among us. So a Buddhist might meditate upon to what are we attached that is causing suffering to the earth and to ourselves. The Jewish person might pose the question in terms of who or what is the Pharaoh that does not let us go. A Muslim or Christian might spend time fasting and praying about what we need to give up to create a more just, loving, and compassionate world that includes the earth, all people, and all living creatures. And what does the Unitarian Universalist say? Perhaps we might ask, what exactly does it look like to respect and promote the interdependent web of all creation? As a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, I must confess, I do not remember much preparation for the coming of spring or the words interdependent web of all creation. My childhood UU congregation, which was wonderful and caring, focused on the wonder of spring and a sort of secularized Easter with pretty clothes and colored eggs and candy and flowers. Nor do I remember the now widely adopted flower communion, which seems to serve loosely as a UU equinox, Easter, Earth Day celebration. Our seventh principle was not written until 1984, and our sixth source, which recognizes the teachings of earth-centered traditions, was not added until 1995, all of which means our thinking about this is rather new. And so I found myself, even before I embraced fully the issue of climate justice, wanting to go deeper. And the only way I knew how to do that was to dig further back into our UU Christian roots, because I was hungry to find a process and a support for the very hard work it takes to bring about growth in my own life, never mind for a world that needs healing on a cosmic scale. So years ago, rather clandestinely, I began to observe the season of Lent, because Lent seemed to offer the space to admit, reflect, practice, and struggle with my own shortcomings and challenges. I won't even pretend to say that I knew what I was doing. There was definitely no church or Jesus involved. It was an opportunity to engage myself. And yet I did not feel alone, because I knew that thousands of others were doing something at the same time, even if it wasn't exactly the same thing. So that first year, I decided to give up soda. It was an addiction that began out of my desperation to stay awake during the day after spending each night with a sleepless infant. I continued in the next year by decaffeinating altogether, and in subsequent years, giving up things like sugar and alcohol, at least for those 6 weeks. Yeah, okay, I still have work to do. My practice has not always been even, but over the years it has deepened into morning rituals of reading, reflecting, and journaling as a way to sharpen my internal conversation with myself and the transcendent, that sense of connection to the world beyond myself, however we choose to think of it. And I can see now how Lent can easily have an earth-based focus. You see, Lent begins with ashes and grief, a reminder that life is fragile and mortal, that we are made of earth and to it we shall return. It is a time of prayer and reflection, a way to admit and wrestle with my own shortcomings and do what I need to grow stronger in my path. It is about abstaining, and there are many things from which we can abstain that would help the earth. And finally, it is an opportunity to think of others in an eco-Lent, a time to reflect, to do good works for those who are displaced from homes because of fires and floods, including animals, and the destruction of ecosystems. The repetition of the Lenten season brings me both challenge and comfort. Every year, I can see that I am making growth in my spiritual maturity and in the changes that I make in my daily life. Lent is about practice, helping me learn how to take the next step, helping me build up my spiritual resilience for bolder steps and challenges. And don't we live in a world that needs people with spiritual resilience, moral clarity, the willingness to take courageous steps and make difficult changes? Now, I respect if Lent is just not your thing. That's okay. But it has been meaningful to me, and it feels like a much richer process than simply celebrating spring and the beauty of the interdependent web for just a morning. Because as it turns out, that web takes a whole lot of tending. It needs lots of repairers and partners ready to get up every morning and start again, to hold each other when we are tired and even when we think each other is not doing enough. So at GreenFaith, we are inviting people to view their holy days through the lens of climate justice. We are offering opportunities for people of different faiths to gather to talk about what they are doing or what they might do. It could mean reframing your traditional service or practice to center the issue and people of a frontline community in your local region. Maybe it's planning an Earth Day event that does a similar thing. It could be something as simple and as difficult as having a conversation about climate justice with friends or family members. If you don't already have a faith group focused on climate and environmental justice, you could get some people together to talk about it. And if you already do, we invite you to engage with faith communities beyond your own, to build relationships and combine your efforts. If you haven't already, I invite you to join with the UU Ministry for the Earth or register as a GreenFaith Circle and join our efforts, or do both. And if you are already doing all of that, then yay, it makes me excited, and I hope to hear all about it very soon. Finally, because we know this whole process needs to happen on such a large scale, I urge you to check out the work we are doing on climate finance, to stop the investment in fossil fuels and to build back fossil free. Just on Thursday, we had a wonderful action hour that centered the Hip Hop Caucus leader, Reverend Yearwood, and Sharon Levine from Rise St. James in Louisiana, as they fight the Stop Formosa Plastics effort. Our country and culture is the largest user of fossil fuels per person in the world. We have a lifestyle that disproportionately contributes to the suffering of people and the planet. It is a matter of justice. And our leadership on this issue is meaningful. It could be far-reaching, and it is desperately needed. From greening our own wallets and investments to pressuring big banks, asset managers, and government together, we can have an impact. Indeed, if you are following this issue, you know that just in the last year, some corporations are changing. But as we know, the situation is urgent and the resistance to change is always strong. We must press hard and be unequivocal in our vision to create a world of flourishing life that works for all. Thankfully, joyfully, spring is coming yet again this year. We must all do our part to ensure that Mother Earth will continue to dress the earth with flowers, fill the air with twittering birds, and drench the soil with life-giving waters that will grow our food. In this way, we will be good partners and practice what it means to live in reciprocity with the earth and all beings. Whatever your hardships, whatever your struggles, may your spring bring hope and courage and a sense of life and faith renewed together. May it be so. Blessed be.